What is up, Fighting Irish fans? The Notre Dame football team was back on the field today for the 15th practice of the month of August as Notre Dame and head coach Brian Kelly get prepared for the season opener at Florida State. Media got to see the first 30 minutes of practice. Blueandgold.com was there. We've got highlights. We've got some takeaways. Before we dive into the video, make sure you hit the thumbs up, like and subscribe, comment on the video. Go to blueandgold.com for all the practice coverage, and we appreciate you guys. Tyler Horka back with us, blueandgold.com beat writer who got to see Notre Dame's practice, the first 30 minutes of it, I should say. Just gonna go on a limb and say it was a stretch fest. So we'll still talk about today's practice though. What did you guys get to see? Stretching, then what? Like, what did the media get to see in that 30-minute window?
Yeah, Mike, I wish I could say that it wasn't another stretch fest, but that's just what we've become accustomed to watching these Notre Dame practices. But again, you can still glean some things from that. It feels like a sauna in there in that Notre Dame indoor practice facility. It's probably 90 degrees outside. I'm willing to say it's pretty close to that inside, just minus the sunlight. And you see a guy like Drew White, who's at the front of the stretching lines, obviously one of Notre Dame's most important players, not just for the defense, but the team as a whole. And he's out there sprinting what looks like they're going through progressions of maybe 50% and then 60% and maybe get up to somewhere around 75%. It looks like he's going 100% of the time. So that's just kind of the tone that he's trying to set for these Notre Dame practices. It starts from the top, right? Like I said, he's at the front of these stretching lines. Everyone sees him go first. And when he's going all out like that, I think it sets the tone for these practices. After stretching, we saw the 11 on O drives on air, 2-minute drills, if that's what you want to call it. Nothing really surprising there. Jack Coan leading the starters, Drew Pine going with the second team, Tyler Buckner going with the third team. One takeaway from the first team, 11 on 0, 2-minute drill. Michael Mayer got more reps than he's usually been getting in these. It seems like they've been focusing on running backs and wide receivers in those. Today I saw him catch a couple passes in a row, and he looked like a focal point. Again, that's not too surprising. You're going to lean on a guy like Michael Mayer if you're Notre Dame this season, but that was one thing that I noticed in that particular portion of practice.
Now, on Tuesday, Brian Polian, special teams coordinator, met with the media. I'm curious where things stand. You actually had an article on this at blueandgold.com as well, but what's your take on punt returner, kick returner? What have you guys seen in August at those positions? What are you expecting Notre Dame to have against Florida State?
So I'm expecting Matt Salerno to kind of, like he was last year, be the mainstay at that position, but in a game where Notre Dame may need something out of the special teams, out of particularly punt return, I don't think Brian Polian's going to be afraid to put somebody like Kyron Williams back there. We've seen Kevin Austin, who usually you don't see big receivers like that. I know, like Alabama would put Devontae Smith back there, but he's a little smaller and a little quicker and speedier. Kevin Austin is a big dude, so it's just really interesting to watch him field punts. He looks pretty comfortable back there. Kyron Williams is obviously one of the better athletes on the offensive side of the ball. He looks really comfortable back there. I think Lorenzo Styles is a guy, especially if he doesn't get involved very much in the offense, is a guy that you can put back there because he's a game-changing athletic type of player. But the bottom line is Brian Polian has a lot of options back there. I don't think he's going to strictly stick with Matt Salerno. You're going to see a guy like Kyron Williams, Lorenzo Styles, maybe even Kevin Austin try to change the game. Speaking of changing the game, in the kick return facet of the game, he really said that Chris Tyree is the guy for Notre Dame there. They've tried out other guys like Salerno, like senior running back Sebo Flemister, but at the end of the day, Chris Tyree can do things in the kick return game that nobody else on this roster can really do. So that's kind of where the two return teams stand.
Also wanted to ask you kind of about the coaching staff. Like, this is your first time seeing these guys in person. Did anyone maybe surprise you with their demeanor and how they interacted with the players? Like, what did you think about some of those Notre Dame coaches and these practices?
Marcus Freeman is the guy that sticks out right away, and I it's only fitting that we started these videos from fall camp talking about Marcus Freeman and just his gestures out there on the practice field. We're going to end with that too. He's everywhere out there, especially in those stretching lines. Like you said, you can kind of glean some things just about team culture and team chemistry from those stretching lines. Marcus Freeman's everywhere. He's talking to everybody, and that's kind of infused down into the defense, just the players on the defense too. Bottom line is Kurt Hinish is not out there, but he's still walking around the stretching lines in these guys' ears. I saw him up close with Zeke Correll, who's an offensive lineman, and he's in the Zeke Correll's ear hole in the helmet saying, hey man, let's have a good practice. Like, here's what we got to do. That's a defensive lineman talking to an offensive lineman. So that right there, I think, has fused down from Marcus Freeman. The rest of the coaches, they seem to be pretty on top of it too. We talked about Brian Polian. He's a guy that, I know he's just a special teams coordinator, but he's kind of out there all over the place, interacting with these guys, mingling with these guys. Because think about it, special teams, you're pulling from the offense, you're pulling from the defense. Somebody's got to fit that 11-man unit that goes out there on a kickoff or a kick return or something like that. Brian Polian has a good relationship with these guys. I think Mike Elston, you can kind of hear his voice from anywhere. He's it's a recognizable voice. Close your eyes and you know that it's Mike Elston coaching these guys up. Really, I think all the coaches are kind of on the same page, and that's huge going into a season like this. Now that we're back to normal, I think it's important for these Notre Dame coaches to be on the same page, and Brian Kelly really has all these guys walking in a straight line in the same line.
Now, Tyler, this was the last practice that media was able to see, and I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see another practice until spring ball, so I hope you enjoyed it. Biggest takeaway, one or two things, that now that you guys are done seeing practice that you're kind of taken away from this month.
I did not expect Jack Coan to be as far ahead as these other two quarterbacks, Drew Pine and true freshman Tyler Buckner, as he was in every single practice that the media got to watch. It seemed like every day he was getting better and better. Obviously, he was named the starter pretty early in camp, so the coaching staff had a good idea that was going to be the case. But every time we got to come out here, I mean, Jack Coan is throwing a tight football. He's throwing a nice spiral. He's putting it on the money. A lot of these drills that we get to see are receivers running routes on air, so there's nobody defending them. It's just a quarterback and the wide receiver. Quarterback's got to put the ball on the receiver. Jack Coan does that better than anybody on this team. It's clear that just from a pure throwing standpoint, he's better than Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner. And then in those scrimmages that we got to watch too, I thought he just had a really good feel of this offense, which is a really good sign for a guy that transferred in here less than a calendar year ago, obviously. So my biggest takeaway from fall camp was, if you were worried about Jack Coan coming over from Wisconsin and really not fitting in well at Notre Dame, or maybe not being the game-changing type of quarterback that a lot of people might not think he is, I would probably walk back that take a little bit because Jack Coan looks pretty good, and I think he's going to be a pretty solid quarterback for Notre Dame this year.
That's going to do it for today's video. Make sure you lock in right here at blueandgold.com and our YouTube page for so much more Notre Dame football coverage. We'll have a video coming out soon projecting game-by-game win-losses for Notre Dame this season. Tons of recruiting videos coming up here as all of our staff will be out on the road seeing some high school games. Again, make sure to lock in at blueandgold.com.